Welcome to the Bill Walton Show, featuring conversations with leaders, entrepreneurs, artists, and thinkers. Fresh perspectives on money, culture, politics, and human flourishing. Interesting people, interesting things.
Welcome to the Bill Walton Show. Some of society's problems are just so upsetting that it's hard to imagine that they continue to exist. Well, today's show is going to get into some of the worst. Child abuse, child pornography, sex trafficking, internet pornography. It's been called the largest unregulated social experiment in history. With me to dig into this are Donna Rice Hughes and Colby May. Donna is President and CEO of Enough is Enough. She's an internationally known safety expert, author, speaker, and film producer. Since 1994, she's been a pioneering leader on the front lines of the U.S. effort to make the internet safer for children and families. Colby May, Senior Counsel and Director of the Washington Office of the American Center for Law and Justice, where he represents members of the U.S. House of Representatives and the Senate on legislative matters involving national security, abortion, marriage, and pornography. Well, we've got quite a subject for today. Donna, you've dedicated your life to this, and Colby, you've been at this also for 3 or 4 decades, so we've got some grizzled veterans from the front lines on these issues. Donna, this is an extremely emotional and upsetting topic. How did you decide to dedicate your life to fixing the problem?
Well, quite frankly, I didn't make that decision early on. I was looking for a job, and I had the opportunity to come to work at Enough is Enough. And it was run by a wonderful woman who's a friend of Colby's and his lovely wife, Nina. Her name is Dee Jepson. And when we were talking, when she was interviewing me, they were, at that time, this was 1994, the focus of Enough is Enough was protecting children and families from pornography in print and broadcast because the internet hadn't happened yet. And so when she was talking to me about this, she talked about the harms of pornography and the myths of pornography. And I said, well, what are those? And she started naming off all this stuff, and my head was spinning. But one of the things she said is that one of the harms of pornography is that it promotes the rape myth. And I said, well, what's that? She said that when a woman says no, she really means yes and wants to be violated. And for me, the light turned green because I had heard those words before when I lost my virginity when I was 22. And when the man said to me, but I thought you were just playing a game and that you really meant yes, I knew that this was something I had to get involved with. And over the years, I've discovered from even my early sexual abuse as a child that this issue, and it's a massive issue, like you said, has impacted my life. And my prayer has always been for God to use the pain of my life for good. And so this has been a wonderful way for me to use the gifts and talents and the opportunities He's given me to help prevent this type of thing from happening to other children and to other women.
Well, what are you? Colby, you've been on the board of Enough is Enough, and you've also been involved.
Yes, indeed. I mean, from my perspective, I feel like one of the reasons I got involved, of course, is through people and they need help, and so you help. But the thing that always struck me about this issue particularly, in its various forms, from pornography to child abuse to sex trafficking, the whole gambit is all tied together. And for me, I recognize that the one characteristic that human beings have that ties us all together is the capacity for empathy. And the idea is that how can you be looking at these images and not have some understanding about these being real people and you be empathetic, right? Do unto others sort of an idea. And nobody really wants to be treated in a particular way. And so when you tee off on that myth idea that really is just a game, you wonder why society is still trying to figure a lot of these things out, and it morphs into things like the Me Too movement or other things because there's just such a convulsion that's happening.
Well, how pervasive is the problem? I mean,
if I can just run through, Colby started with all the different problems. So let's just take one of the worst, child pornography. That is the actual sexual abuse of a child being videotaped or recorded. Last year, there were over 75 million images reported in a congressional testimony. The tech company said that they had
75 million images on the internet.
and the images are as young as babies and toddlers being sexually violated, abused, and even raped. All right, this is a problem that AG Barr says that we cannot prosecute our way out of. That's one issue. The other is pornography, hardcore material. And Colby and I can talk a little bit more about this. But this was what you referred to as the largest unregulated social experiment in human history. Much of the content that is out there is hardcore, it's extreme. Kids under 10 years old are getting hooked on it, addicted to it, the kinds of themes that I know.
And it's free.
And it's free, and it's mostly prosecutable under U.S. law, but it's not being prosecuted. Then you've got trafficking, which is the largest organized crime business in the United States and worldwide. All this ties together because one fuels the other. Then, of course, you have sexual predators. They use child pornography. They make child pornography. They groom kids on the internet. And so our focus at Enough is Enough is preventing the internet-enabled and the internet-fueled exploitation of children and women.
You talk about a cycle of abuse. We've got, I guess, the child sex abuse images plays into the sex trafficking and pornography. They're all related. And who's behind this? I mean, we've got sites like Pornhub, and that's the famous and the big one. But I mean, who's making money from this? This is an industry, and it's so there's the human appetite for sex, I suppose, and then there's the human appetite for money, and they're coming together in an unholy alliance in this.
So it's a perfect storm in many ways, where you have both the mom and pop operations that are otherwise allowed to get access to the world through the World Wide Web, and you also have large publishing companies, whether or not it's the Playboys or the Penthouses kind of thing, which have moved into completely different kind of content than you might imagine when you were a young man in the 1960s or something. So it is both on both ends of that economic spectrum where this thing is being exploited and used. Obviously, if there was no money to be made in it, then certainly the magnitude of the problem would not exist the way it exists today. There is an enormous amount of money that's involved in it. And once you get those two things together, you're never going to be able to simply stamp it out, which is why constantly it has to be a confrontation of it. You have to be able to expose it, and in many ways, the shame factor for so long that works so well, I think, is missing from the modern discussion.
Well, yeah, there's really very little shame factor anymore.
There's no shame anymore.
If you go on and you look up Pornhub, for example, you'll find an interview that was done in Yahoo Finance talking about the Pornhub business model. Yeah. And in it, you learn that Pornhub's worth the number $3 billion.
$3 billion, yeah.
So it's being treated as a mainstream activity, and then Pornhub's got something called the Pornhub Fund, which is providing scholarships to porn stars. Sure. This
is mainstream. When we started, the kind of content that was available was just on news groups.
Yeah.
I mean, it was free, but it wasn't mainstream. Now it's mainstream. So Pornhub is a pornocopia. You can get anything from bestiality.
Did you call it a pornocopia?
Pornocopia. You can get bestiality. You can get, whatever that you want.
Yeah.
Asian girls, groups, this, that, and the other. And kids are going there. There were 42 billion visits last year in 2019. And it's not just obscene adult types of pornogaphy. There's also child pornography there. There are victims that are trafficked there. The largest most watched video this year was of a teenage girl who was being raped and electrocuted. And the amount of visits it got in one day will blow your mind. And that's trafficking. So we are really trying to get this Justice Department to, this is low-hanging fruit to prosecute Pornhub, because they really are the cornerstone of this effort. There's big money.
The vice president who was interviewed talks about all those predatory things they do, lines of business.
Yeah.
Who owns Pornhub?
MindGeek.
Who's that?
They're the company that owns Pornhub. So this, understand.
Publicly traded?
No,
No,
not
it's private,
no.
okay.
It's private, but there's so much money involved that it's mind-boggling.
Yeah.
There's a lot of money in child pornography. And even in child pornography, there's more and more child pornography being created because in order to get into these child porn clubs, pedophiles are being asked to, in order to get access to new child pornography, they have to create child pornography themselves, which means they have to abuse another child, create content, and then upload it to gain access to the club. So it's all
So it's a
just
kind of pay-to-play
that's
thing
a
where you
pay to
you gotta-
play. That's a
Yes.
barter deal.
Yeah.
But there's also money involved. So it's big business, and it's the greed. The love of money is the root of all evil, and you combine that, Bill, with what you said, the sexual exploitation factor, and really this is just counterfeit sex.
Well, you've been educating people now for almost 3 decades. I mean, why isn't more known about this and done about this? Is there just people looking the other way? I mean, you point out that parents are uninformed and ill-equipped. They don't really know what's out there, I guess.
You know, it's a constant education process that you have to go through. You know, Enough is Enough developed Internet Safety 101. It's a complete program to sort of arm families from how do you allow your children to go into the frontier known as the Internet. So there are really effective ways to do it. There are other groups that have done the same thing. There's lots out there that can help families address it. But frankly, what happens is you get busy in your own life, and you don't really pay that much attention because you've got so much else going on. And yet the corrosive impact of this is being manifest in a lot of different social problems that you see. I mean, one of the things you mentioned at the outset here is there's a large social experiment just on the pornography, access to pornography side of things, to where people's the neurological connections in young men's minds, for example,
And women.
and women's minds. They're impacted by the idea of seeing pornographic images and the idea of sort of like a lottery, like a roulette wheel or a slot machine or whatever it is. You don't know what you're going to get when you go to the new next website, and so this image pops up, and if you like it, you get the effective endorphin rush that happens. As a consequence, your brain is literally wired differently, and you're only 13 years old or 14 years old. And so it begins to really change you in a profound way that impacts you, the balance of your life. Now, what child at the age of 13 would you want to say, now get to make a decision that's going to affect the rest of your life? Not many parents would allow their children to be able to make that unless they were involved in the decision-making. And that's not what's going on now. So it's a profound problem for society, and yet it's kind of an icky topic. No one really wants to talk about it.
Well, that
It's
was
awful.
what I experienced when I was researching this. It just sort of, you wander into it and you go, I need a shower. This is really an ugly topic. You're watching The Bill Walton Show. I'm here with Donna Rice Hughes and Colby May, and we're talking about the sewer that is the pornography business in America and worldwide. Donna, you mentioned something in one of your writings about the 2016 Barna report. We talked about teenagers. It says that 75% of males between the ages of 13 or 24 actively seeking pornography at least once or twice a month on the internet.
And that was a couple of years old. And and we now know that it's actually more than that. That was really comparing Christian youth to non-believers, and you do see that oftentimes those with a faith, are not
So
are
fewer-
being more
fewer Christians, yeah.
Fewer are, but it's still a huge problem inside the church. But one of the things I wanted to mention back to parents. Parents are the first line of defense to protect their own children. We all want that, right? But what I found over the 30 years is that parents often think that their kid is immune. Because if they have a smart kid, a good kid, a kid that likes sports and this kind of, they're thinking, my kid isn't going to fall into pornography. They're not going to be stupid enough to be groomed by a sexual predator in a chat room or on social media, or to send a text of themselves and to take their clothes off. And yet, this is happening all the time. These are good kids that are being drawn into this world because their lives are very much online, and there's a whole online culture.
It's worse. It's as if you have to be mainstream, right? So you get Teen Magazine and all these sort of cultural icon places that just sort of encourage it, right? They do articles on how can you send a sexting, and
Well,
how do you do
Well,
that? It's just,
well, mainstream popular culture in America has no taboo against any of this. I
Well-
mean, Teen Vogue, which you've written about,
Right, we
is
have a
is
petition.
egregious. And
Yeah.
this is a problem not just for young men, it's a problem for young women as well.
Well, Teen Vogue, they brag of an audience of 13 to 19-year-olds, girls and boys, but they don't call them girls and boys. They call girls non-prostate owners, and they call boys prostate owners. We started a petition years ago because they.
You're kidding.
I know. No, I'm not kidding. There's
And
such
that-
an agenda, right? There's an agenda. But their first.
So if I pick up Teen Vogue, I'm going to read that that's what they think.
You are a prostate owner, Bill, and so are you, and I'm the only non-prostate owner at the table. But the thing that got our attention 3 years ago is they came up with the Anal Sex 101 guide, teaching tweens and teens to engage in anal sex. They didn't talk about the transmission of AIDS or anything else. Well, it's gone downhill from there. This year, with COVID, they took full advantage of COVID, and they said to kids through Teen Vogue, keep your sex lives alive and learn how to sext. So they did a whole sexting articles, and they promoted it on Snapchat. Well, when a child sex, a minor kid, they're creating what, Colby? Child pornography.
Oh, yeah.
That's criminal. That's illegal. Not only that, those images can get in the hands of traffickers and pedophiles.
Yeah, here are the titles. Sexting should make you feel good.
Mm-hmm.
How to sext, the best tips and tricks.
Yes.
And then they go wandering into the anal sex manual. Stunning.
yeah,
Well, we've
it is
got
stunning.
almost 45,000 petition signers, and you can sign the petition at enough.org. And we're asking this time for Condé Nast. Now, this is a wonderful company, Condé Nast, publicly traded, Vogue, Vanity Fair.
Well, I'm not so
huge-
sure Connie Nast is a wonderful company.
Well, okay, but I happen to like Vogue magazine. Okay,
Well, I liked Vogue magazine
I
30
like
years
Vogue
ago,
magazine,
but it's changed.
well,
Okay,
but we're asking
different
Condé
show,
Nast
different
to
episode.
take this rogue teen publication down, just because they cannot clean up their act. They have not, and I just don't think they're going to do it, so they just need to come down.
It's
So
money.
we are shaming them, Colby, like you said.
Yeah, I mean, it's money. It's hard to get people to act in the opposite of their own self-interest as they perceive it. So it's not an easy thing to do. I mean, one of the things, so you've got the social activity that's going on, and what do we do, and how do companies responsibly act in the marketplace, so on and so forth. That's important to do it. One of the things that Enough is Enough and other groups involved in this issue have tried to do is to get the technology companies to sort of weigh in on this in a way that's much more constructive than what they currently do. So, for example, there was an effort a couple of years ago that Enough and Enough started about the Wi-Fi access that you get in public places, right? Your Starbucks store, so on and so forth. You have people that actually access pornography. It's actively showing, and there you are with your kids at Starbucks to get the next macchiato or whatever it is. And so the idea was to create a social responsibility on behalf of those companies to not allow that, to block that, because technology now allows that to happen. And you'd be amazed at the kind of resistance you get from that. And it's incredible to think that Starbucks wouldn't want to be first in line to say, wait, that's a great idea. Why didn't we think of that? Let us make sure that the Wi-Fi that's available in our store is family-friendly, because we are, after all, a family-friendly company.
Right, and they
yet
were
they resist,
filtering
so-
overseas. And so we approached McDonald's and Starbucks several years ago, say, you're filtering, you're protecting children and families in Europe and in the UK.
Because
Why don't
the
you
EU
do it in
requires
America?
them to do it.
Well, Prime Minister Cameron, yeah, he said, I want you to do this or I'm going to regulate it. So they did. Here, McDonald's said yes right away. McDonald's has been filtering in all their stores in the United States for several years now. It took us a while to get Starbucks on board, but our goal is to get the rest of corporate America that offers Wi-Fi. Because remember, you go into the grocery store, into a mall, into a stadium, into an airport, you've got your cell phone and your tablet. You're hopping on a Wi-Fi network. These companies can easily, very inexpensively, turn on a filter that blocks child pornography, which is illegal, and pornography, and any other kind of content they want to. So we're appealing to them to be corporately responsible, but also to protect their brand and their place of business from customers misusing the Wi-Fi that they give them for free to, for instance, download child pornography. And we're seeing this all over. Cops are arresting pedophiles going into these places of business, uploading and downloading child porn.
Yeah.
So I've got like 93,000 questions. let's stick with the social media companies, the internet issues. I mean, how long has this been going on? We talked before about the Blue Book and the story. What was that all about?
Wow. Well, the Communications Decency Act, which is sort of the grandfather of the attempt to regulate in this area.
That was 1986?
1995, 96.
1995, okay.
Was beginning to be introduced and finally passed in 1996. And the idea, and so the Blue Book story is very interesting. As you're trying to get this issue to be understood by the legislators, you're finding that they don't get it. They're not really sure, why should I do this? What's wrong with the First Amendment? Robust this, you get to choose, that sort of thing. And so
yeah, we're for free speech.
We're all for free speech. And, the truth is I want less regulation and a light regulatory touch. But the reality is that there are laws already on the books that protect children, harmful to minor standards in various state laws, so on and so forth, and then laws against obscenity and indecency in various fora that take place. So when you're trying to get the legislators to understand why this issue really matters and what's really going on, sometimes, as they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? So Donna and her group were responsible in pulling together what we called the Blue Book, which was a notebook at the time, 1995, when the internet.
Donna pulled this together.
Donna and
Our
her people
team.
with
Okay.
D. Jepson at the Enough is Enough group pulled this together, and it was essentially just images that you could get and print off the internet in 1995 when the internet was young. Totally unregulated.
And Netscape had been public for about 3 years. Yeah.
And
like
so
yeah.
you compile this book saying, here's the reason the legislatures need to sort of check in on this particular issue. So
And
take it away from here.
So what
because-
happened was we had a big event where we actually launched the internet safety movement, and Nina and Colby, Colby's wife Nina was there, and Colby were
I meant to
there.
introduce Colby as he's married to.
Yeah, he's married to Nina May. Okay,
Yeah,
amazing
he's-
woman. All right.
Let's be clear
She
about.
is the force of nature, I'll agree.
Yeah, she definitely is.
Okay.
So, but anyway,
She was on the show with Nancy Stafford a little bit ago.
Oh, nice.
Anyway,
they
continue.
were Senator Exxon's office said nobody's paying attention, and I said, well, why not? And I said, what are you doing? I said, are you showing them what's there? Are you showing them the descriptions and the images? They said, no. I said, well, you have to do that. They didn't know how. So we put together this Blue Book. It's just a blue binder, and Senator Exxon's staff passed it to every senator. It went around the Senate floor, and the next day they took a vote, and there were only 2 dissenting senators, and that's how the Communications Decency Act got off the ground, and then it went to the House, and we went back and forth, and that really formed the framework for this whole issue. Now, we're still dealing with some of that today.
I just have this image of old men looking at dirty pictures.
Well, but here's
a little
the
of
thing. What we
They
wanted
must
to
have really
do,
enjoyed, these
No.
briefing books get better and better.
we wanted to shock them because there was incest in there. There was a lot of
God.
anal sex. There was a lot of
So even
toddler stuff.
back then,
there was a lot of bestiality, and we wanted them to understand this is not airbrushed nudity, Playboy stuff. We want you to understand this is a whole different ballgame. This is the kind of content that you can't get in a XXX rated bookstore before the internet, and kids are going to be able to get it for free. Fast forward, Pornhub, that kind of content that was on the fringes is now mainstream, and this is the appetite that this is what is kids are getting a steady diet of through the internet, and it is absolutely frightening, the kinds of content that they're using, that they're getting addicted to, that they're acting out with their peers. Young teenage boys are among the largest growing demographic of sex offenders, of those who are acting out their fantasies on other kids and younger kids, because they're acting out what they're seeing.
So these internet pornographers must have an army of lawyers, Colby.
They do.
Is it,
Oh, yes.
because we're advocates of free speech,
Oh,
First
yeah.
Amendment rights. We get into these issues of obscenity. The question
not
is always,
protected.
Yeah,
okay, well,
obscenity is not
where's the line drawn? And tell me about what their lawyers are saying when you tell them take it off the internet.
It's a very difficult and very subtle kind of a series of issues. The law describes things that are obscene or indecent in terms of sexual organs and excretory functions. And then if you're going to describe those particular topics, you have to do it in a manner that at least has some redemptive factor to it, social, civil, civic, scientific, artistic, something along those lines. In order to make those kind of judgments, clearly there's subjective evaluation that goes on. Now, a lot of states have passed what they call harmful to minor standards that have defined some of those specific terms. And if you produce something that meets one of those terms, you violated the state law. But in terms of the obscenity charge, why is that important? Because the mere possession of obscenity is not illegal, but the passive production or pandering or distribution of pornography is a crime. And so it matters what it is we've got. What content do I have here? So from a libertarian First Amendment sort of standpoint, if you have it, okay, no harm, no foul, right? No one's going to come into your bedroom or your home and say, you can't have that material. But if you try to pander that and pass that around and do that, now that's the crime aspect of it. And that's what we believe that the technology formats allow you to have happen in sort of this anonymity and a secretive way that's wrong.
So you're watching the Bill Walton Show. I'm here with Colby May and Donna Rice Hughes, and we're talking about freedom of speech issues, obscenity, and where the line gets drawn with child pornography and the toxic, terrible stuff that's on the internet. Again, I keep wandering into different directions, but let's go at the core problem, which is the psychological impact it has on kids and viewers. What's this doing to our psyche? I mean, it seems to me that there's an underlying evil thing that's being percolated inside people. The most fastest growing sites are the gangbang sites and things like that. What do you have? I mean, are there studies that say X amount of hour? I'm not making this question very succinct, but I'm struggling with trying to define.
Bill,
tough issue.
There is. Well, remember, we're talking about many issues here. We're talking about obscene pornography, child pornography, and others. Let me just talk about obscene pornography. That's not protected speech, as Colby said, right? But there's peer-reviewed medical science that shows the harms of this content on behavior, on attitudes, on your brain chemistry, all of this. We didn't have that. We had anecdotes when we started all these years ago, but now we've got the science. So I think I can't remember how many states now, about half of the states have passed resolutions saying that pornography is a public health issue. And it is. We know that. Now, what's the harm of child pornography? Well, a child is being sexually abused, and then it's being recorded and sold. So that every time a pedophile or a predator uses that child porn, they are re-abusing that child again. Trafficking victims are also being used in the production of child porn and obscenity, right? So you get back to the cycle of abuse. So what's happening, our whole culture worldwide is being coarsened. You know, we're coarsening, but this is a human dignity issue. I always like to bring it back to what are we fighting for? We're fighting for the dignity of everyone, not just those who get hooked into this or who are used in this content or who are trafficked, but for those who have gotten duped into thinking that they can use another person for sex, whether they're a trafficked person or they're a sexual predator or they're somebody using pornography that's being abused right there on camera, and think that's okay. I mean, look at Hitler. The Nazis thought it was okay to exterminate Jews.
Coming back to our favorite magazine, Teen Vogue has got an article about how sex workers are no different from any other kind of work.
It's real work. They say sex work is real work. Well, in other words, kids forget being a rocket scientist, just going to sex.
So how pervasive is sex trafficking? Are there hundreds of thousands, millions? How much of it's in the U.S.? How much of it's worldwide? Is it oriented towards any particular country, or are the Chinese involved in sex trafficking?
Well, every culture is involved in
every
it.
Culture.
There's not any limit. So it's a large problem. It's a worldwide problem. You'll get gangs, criminal gangs, that'll bring women from Eastern Bloc to Europe or to the United States, from Mexico, Latin America, up to the United States or to Canada. The rings of the way in which they do it is just like the coyotes that bring illegal immigrants to the United States, so on and so forth. I mean, it is a worldwide pandemic, and it's a real problem. You ask about, what really happens. The truth is we don't know as a society what the long-term impact is going to be. But we do know that there has been chemical changes in the brain of the people that consume this product. So if you're a parent, you'll say to your 13-year-old or your 12-year-old, don't drink alcohol, don't smoke cigarettes, don't do drugs. But it turns out that if you observe pornography, it has the same impact on the human person. And therefore, it ought to be the same thing the parents say, and don't do that.
Well,
And yet, it's just sort of missing in the conversation. And the reason is because it's sort of an icky topic. Nobody really wants to
And
get
a
into
perverse outcome is it leads to sexual dysfunction. And they're not just in real sex, it's now digital
we're
sex.
now
It's
back to
very hard.
pornography, but I want to go to your sex trafficking
Okay.
issue.
All right, we'll stick-
Kids
yeah.
and women are being trafficked right here in this country. They're not necessarily coming from overseas. Sometimes they are. There are recruiters and groomers going into our high schools across the country and grooming these girls into sexual activity, getting them on tape, then coercing them. We call this sextortion and whatnot, and oftentimes getting them into sex trafficking rings and then shipping them off to some other hub in the United States. So there's a lot of this is forced prostitution or sex trafficking, whatever you want to call it. So I'm going back to the point that no child is immune. I've seen this happen in good families with bright kids, bright girls that are, on the, track team and whatnot and ready to go on a full scholarship that end up sucked into this world. So it's really everywhere. But the United States is one of the top in trafficking. We're also one of the top number 2 in hosting child pornography sites worldwide. And we're also number 1 in the production of hardcore obscenity. And so, Bill, I think it's important to talk about why we need these laws enforced. The porn laws need to be enforced, the obscenity laws, and child pornography. But like Bill Barr said, we can't prosecute our way out of this. But we did come up with a Children's Internet Safety Pledge.
Let's turn to remedies.
Yeah,
I think have we missed anything? I think we've covered the waterfront in terms of how terrible this is. Any other ugly thing that we need to?
Well, no. I mean, it's dark and it's ugly, but it's important to kids know this. You ask any teenager, if I talk to them about what they're seeing and read some of this stuff, they go, yeah, I know, I've already seen it. Usually. They won't tell their parents, but they'll tell me. They'll tell somebody that knows because they know that we know, and we know that they're struggling. But what are the remedies? First of all, parents are the first line of defense. The corporate world needs to be more of a part of the solution than part of the problem. And they hate regulation. Big tech hates regulation. And they don't want it. So we're trying to get them to do proactively things that they should be doing on their own, Colby, like you said.
Absolutely.
But then the government is so important. They really are. When we're one of the top producers of child porn and pornography, we need our Department of Justice and U.S. attorneys and prosecutors to be well equipped. They may need more funding. They need more resources. We need to be treating this like the war that it is. And so we wrote a Children's Internet Presidential Pledge, Safety Presidential Pledge. Let me say that again. The Children's Internet Safety Presidential Pledge. And we took it to Donald Trump and to Hillary Clinton before the last election and said, let's get ahead of the curve. If you get elected, will you make it a top priority to use all the forces of the government and the White House to protect the human dignity and the innocence of our children by enforcing the child porn laws, the porn laws, trafficking laws, and making new policy as necessary? Donald Trump signed it, Hillary Clinton supported it, and now we've got an opportunity to go to Joe Biden to ask him to do the same thing. But we need to recognize this as the pandemic that it is.
Well, do we get action? I mean, every politician's probably going to pay lip service to this.
Right.
It's just, that's their job, I guess. You come to them with an issue like this, of course they're going to sign. Who's responsible for enforcing these laws? Is it the FBI? Is it the state?
It's the U.S. Attorney's offices. And at the federal level, it's the U.S. Attorney's offices. And at the state levels, it's the state.
And how much, if the Justice Department has got a budget, how much of it's dedicated to this?
Oh, it's minuscule. I don't know the exact percentages, but it's very, very small.
To pornography, none.
Yeah.
I went to the members of the Senate and the House, and I said, they say that they don't have the funding to prosecute this. I said, so can you write it in the appropriations budget? And they did. So for this coming year, but they do have money for child pornography and prosecutions and trafficking, but it's not enough. We need to ramp this up like we did with our military when this president came in. We realized we were getting crushed, and if we were going to be in any kind of war, we would not be ready militarily. I think if we look at this as a war on our culture and a war on the innocence of our children and the future of our nation, that we would treat it with the dollars that it needs to get the prosecutors and the action that it needs. And it has not been a priority, and it breaks my heart.
Yeah, and it may
after all these
actually be,
years.
if we can continue to push at that level, we also impact culture writ more large. So you've got the religious communities of America are impacted just like everybody else, and they ought to be taking a much larger role in this than they currently do. It's kind of curious as to why it is that the pulpits of America are not otherwise taking this issue and really driving it home. But, we'll let wandering minds figure out whether or not they think there's some compromise within the church itself. I mean, there's a problem. They need to be addressing that particular problem. Now, related to this is, recently the conservatives have complained mightily about the various, Facebook and Google and all the way in which they might put their finger on the scale. And now you've got the president pushing back with his executive order saying, look, maybe we're going to do away with the liability shield in Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, and I want the FCC and the Federal Trade Commission and all the U.S. attorneys to begin to look at that and figure out what's happening. And so now we're going to see whether or not they respond. But it's
that needs to happen.
because we want.
But you're hinting at a complicity that I think you can't hide from the consideration, which is a lot of adults are paying attention to pornography. And there's a lot of guilt. I think there's been studies about the number of pastors and ministers that have been involved in this. They're not going to give us a speech about it.
And child pornography, too. I mean, there's a lot of crossover with men, especially, that start with adult, extreme porn that then get into younger kids. There's what's called barely legal content where they use girls that are just turned 17 and 18, but they make them look like they're 11, 12, and 13. So it whets the appetites of men. So now men are starting to then gradually start to using child pornography. It's just, at the end of the day, this is a spiritual battle. This is a spiritual battle, and this is why the church is so important.
Let's spend some time with that because, if you read the Bible is very clear about this behavior. It's evil, and it destroys people. And, God destroyed a couple of serious cities because of this kind of behavior.
Right.
It feels like we're there. It feels like we're in a kind of biblical scenario here.
I would agree. I mean, I think that the human heart is complex. It's mysterious, and yet we sort of understand it pretty well, having one, all of us, and the like. And we know sort of what the tendencies are. And unless we're willing to talk about it, unless we're willing to sort of put a light on it, then it continues to thrive in the dark or in the shadows, as it were. And so we can talk around it. Government do this, government do, okay, that's fine to a certain level. But the reality is, unless the human heart is focused on it. So the Bible's a great start. The Old Testament, I always found it to be quite remarkable that you could spend time in the Deuteronomies and the Leviticus part of the book, and it starts talking about, stop having sex with your animals and don't have sex with your brothers and
No, it's
your
in
sister.
Leviticus.
Yeah, I know.
And then you're
I know.
thinking like, what? I need to be instructed about
it's right
this?
there. Yeah.
And, so there is a depravity within the it's sort of mammalian, it's like part of being biological. The drive is to go ahead and reproduce, and so you need to have a fairly active sexual drive. I think we all understand that. But within that, unless you bridle that passion, unless you direct that passion, you don't get a wholesome outcome. Certainly not the kind of outcome that you'd like to have. And so I think society has a great interest in focusing on what is degrading the nature of the two-parent household, and how do we foster that and do other things. And so this is one of the issues that needs to be otherwise described and talked about within that context. Otherwise, you're just simply going to continue to thrive in the shadows.
Where's the left on this issue?
It really depends. I will say that for the years I've been working on this has always been bipartisan, which has been wonderful. It's not a Democrat issue. It's not a Republican issue. Everybody cares about kids. Where you break with some of that is the First Amendment absolutist. And I would put the ACLU in that category because everything we ever got passed, they were the lead plaintiff to fight that.
ACLU is working with you on this?
No.
They were working against you on this?
Against us on this. And from their standpoint, now we'll just take child pornography. Let's just say this is a little girl being sexually abused by a 50-year-old man, right? It's child pornography. They will say that the abuse is criminal and it needs to be prosecuted. But once a video or a picture has been made, that's now speech and should be protected. That's in their bylaws. So if you understand the root of where they're coming from, they're absolutist. And the law, however, disagrees with them on this. So I would say that those are the ones that really primarily fight this. Secondly, it's the corporate world, because they have had a shield of immunity through Section 230 for all these years. We were involved in getting that passed, but it was never meant to give them absolute immunity. And so they've been able to basically say, we didn't create it, we didn't see it, we're not going to do anything about it.
So just to give us all a brief, get us on the same page. 230 was part of the Communications Act, 1995. And it was,
96.
It was there for these young upstart social media companies.
Right.
Give them a liability shield to say, you're not a publisher, you're just a carrier. And therefore, whatever comes across your pipes is not your responsibility.
Right. If you took a good faith effort to protect children from getting it, that was the caveat.
Is that in the law? Is the language?
Yes.
Okay.
It was called the Good Samaritan
But the courts
Defense.
have not otherwise
They
enforced
didn't.
it to that level.
I don't think they have. And this gets into regulating political speech, too, where.
Well, right. But there was, we've been trying to get Section 230 amended all this time because the courts allowed the tech companies to drive a truck through it. It was never meant for that. So a number of years ago, FOSTA was created, and it was to protect FOSTA-SESTA, which was a bipartisan bill. It was signed into law 2 years ago.
I love these acronyms. What's that?
FOSTA-SESTA.
Okay, anyway.
And, well, basically, this was the law that then allowed the prosecutors to say to Backpage, you cannot run ads selling women and children for sex. And if you do, you cannot hide behind 230 anymore. That passed. So now there's another piece of legislation that is looking to even, it's called the Earn It Act, that's going to take this a step further. So these are the attempts now that have been successful
So quick
to turn this around.
I'm sorry. So quick promo for the Enough is Enough website. Do you have information about most of
Everything.
all these topics? Almost everything we've talked about
Yes.
you can be finding.
Enough.org. Get our newsletter. Go to Enough.
It's simply enough.org.
Enough.org. And sign the petition to shut down Teen Vogue, too. But we'll keep you updated, and all this information that we've been talking about is on our site.
We've got a few minutes. What do we talk about prevention strategy. I agree it's a matter of faith and spirit. You got to have it in the human heart that you want to solve this problem or you don't. That's why I ask about left versus right, because I think of the left as being primarily materialist, and this is a spiritual issue, and I can't imagine them wanting to embrace spiritual solutions, or maybe they do. I mean, you've been interacting on a bipartisan basis. What do we need to know about bringing the coalition together?
With respect to the spiritual side, or?
Yeah.
Well, I would say, first of all, we need to go back to the very basics where Jesus.
By the way, that was a very complex question.
Thank
right?
you. Well, it kind of was, but I'm just going to take it.
It had 4 parts. Maybe our lawyer here can break it down. You go first.
Well, I could say this.
That was an unfair question.
I've said before that the human condition is somewhat complicated, and so every issue has to be addressed at multiple levels.
Yeah.
Certainly, we care a lot about the policy side, the legal side of it, as we've described here today. We care about the social, spiritual side of it, which is very real. And unless people really begin to engage on this and care about this kind of an issue, it's just going to limp along and, as they say, grow in the shadows as it's basically done. But ultimately, it is a matter of the human heart. And I think, as I said at the outset, the thing that drove my sort of engagement on this issue is the idea of empathy. And once you stop and say, what is really going on here, and you project yourself to be there, everything, I believe, will change, because you don't want to be that, right? The golden rule, do unto others. You say, I don't want that done unto me. So I got to do something about that, whether or not it's my own personal behavior, whether or not it's some more larger corporate behavior, societal behavior. But those are the kind of things that I think, honestly, the human heart will answer for us. And we don't really have to struggle very hard about how to get an answer for that. But it's multi-layered, and it's definitely going to have to be something that's engaged all the time.
I think it's going to turn when God's people say enough is enough. There's a verse in the Bible, 2 Chronicles 7:14, and God is talking to his people Israel there. But he says, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear them, I will forgive them, and I'll heal their land. I really believe that this is going to turn on the body of Christ worldwide to repent from either being engaged in this or from being a passive bystander and just not caring or not even doing enough to protect their own children and repenting. And then I believe this is going to begin to shift this because it's such a big, evil cesspool of a problem worldwide. And I believe that's the answer. We've seen God turn around cultures all the time when his people get together on something, and that is to shine the light, light the candle. Jesus said, I've come to set the captives free. The enemy comes to kill, steal, and destroy, but I come to set them free. And I believe that that is going to be the turning point to lead us into a breakthrough on this issue, and then hopefully, Lord willing, even a revival in our land.
I think great last words. Donna Rice Hughes, thank you. Colby, May, thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
I'm sure we'd like to have you back, talk some more about things as it evolves. Colby, American Center for Law and Justice has got a great website with a lot of these issues also on there. So I'd encourage, how do we find your website?
ACLJ.org.
Okay.
Easy to find, www.aclj.org. You can go online and you can go there for internet material, pornography, the issues, any issue you want. We deal, of course, with a lot more than just this particular issue, but definitely any kind of information you want there, it's available on our website. Enough.org, as we mentioned before, also where this resource material is.
Donna, anything else that we can talk about where we can find your ideas and help support your causes?
Thank you. Yes, enough.org. We are a nonprofit,
Yeah.
and so we rely on financial support from individuals and not the government. So we can't fight these battles without people partnering with us. And we also have the InternetSafety101.org website where all the information about what you need to know as a parent or grandparent to protect your kid, it's all there. We break it down from trafficking to predation, protecting them from pornography and cyberbullying. It's all right there at InternetSafety101.org.
Great. Well, Donna, Colby, thanks. Thanks for joining me to the Bill Walton Show. You can learn more about this topic on our new website. We have a section called Interesting People, and both Colby and Donna will have their own page on Interesting People, where you can also find links to the things they're working on. Also, if you'd give me your comments about this show and ideas about future guests and future topics, it is much appreciated. We pay a lot of attention to the issues that people think are important. So thanks for joining, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening. Want more? Be sure to subscribe at thebillwaltonshow.com or on iTunes.